We're going to have to think, do we want this or not?
David Wood is a futurist, transhumanist, and the author of The Abolition of Aging. A pioneer in the field of longevity science and emerging technologies, he advocates for a future where aging can be prevented, reversed, and ultimately eliminated.
And I want to make it possible for those who want to liberate themselves from the downward pull of aging. We transhumanists say this is something we can improve on. Indeed, this is something we must improve on.
People want to stay youthful for so long. It's a $1 trillion industry.
Now, the naked mole rat, even when they're in their 30s, they're not dying more often than when they were in their 10s. We can grow meat like we grow whiskey. So I think the Earth could cope quite easily with 10 times as many people as we've got today.
But are we going to be as driven if we know we're going to have so much time?
So when people say the meaning of life is to learn how to die, I would say the meaning of life is to learn how to live.
I want to be able to live long enough to be able to accomplish everything that I wanted to accomplish and also see my family accomplish everything.
I'm fairly sure that in 20 years' time I'll be doing things that I can't even imagine now.
Hi, David. I am beyond excited to have you on the Be That Life podcast because of who you are and everything you have accomplished. I think just from everything that I've read about you and read about your book and the things that you speak about, I am so fascinated about so many of those different topics, specifically on longevity and aging. Now, before we begin, I wanted to just read a small paragraph of a part of your book, The Abolition of Aging. I want to read this paragraph because just by that paragraph alone, it just blew my mind away. And it got me thinking about so many different things, right? Specifically, the fact that we can live past what normal society has taught us that we can live till. I'm going to read it. Within our collective grasp dwells the remarkable possibility of the abolition of biological aging. It's a big if, but if we decide as a species to make this project a priority, there's around a 50% chance that practical rejuvenation therapies resulting in the comprehensive reversal of aging will be widely available as early as 2040. People everywhere on the application of these treatments will, if they wish, stop becoming biologically older. And instead, again, if they wish, they'll start becoming biologically younger in both body and mind as rejuvenation therapies take hold. In short, everyone will have the option to become ageless. I mean, just reading that paragraph alone made me feel, wow, it's such an exciting time to be living in the world that we live in. Am I right?
It is exciting. In some ways, this is the most remarkable time in history because science, technology, medicine has increased in leaps and bounds. And what we've seen in the last 20 years in terms of progress could be easily overtaken by what happens in the next 20 years. So all kinds of ideas that in the past seemed crazy are now going to become feasible. We're going to have to think, do we want this or not? And I want to make it possible for those who want to liberate themselves from the downward pull of aging. I want to give people that choice.
What inspired you to write The Abolition of Aging?
So this thing has many backstories to it. I needed more recently to figure out, did I really believe that this is not just a fine idea, but is there strong scientific credibility behind it? So I spent quite a while, since about 2005 till 2015, making up my mind how good was the science behind such bold claims. I say 2005 because that's roughly the first time I came across these ideas spelt out seriously myself. This was by meeting Aubrey de Grey, a Cambridge biogerontologist. His background, like mine, was in software engineering. Like me, he transitioned into wider study and he'd learned more about biology. And he was advocating, since actually the year 2000, so it's now 25 years since he had his first eureka moment, that aging should be understood as a collection of damage in different parts of the body, damage inside our cells, damage inside the power plants inside our cells, that's the so-called mitochondria, damage in the extracellular matrix that links our cells together, that if we understood that and then we applied a different range of treatments, we could undo all that damage. I need to find out, was this credible? One of my backgrounds is in 4 years studying the philosophy of science, which I think is an incredibly important subject. It might sound arcane, but part of what the philosophy of science is about is if somebody sounds scientific, are they actually following good principles of science, or are they just impressing people with scientific formalism and a lab coat and a variety of test tubes? And there have been many cases of, at that time it was called pseudoscience, nowadays we might call it fake science. So I needed to figure out, was this true science or not? And by 2015, I was quite clear. This is credible, which led me to write the book.
I love Aubrey de Grey. I really believe everything he speaks about, and he's really a man on the mission to try to, abolish aging. And how long did it take you before you completed this book?
I think I spent about 1.5 years writing the book. As always with me, I'm doing multiple projects at the same time, so I can't remember exactly the sequencing, but I was working on another book for a while at the same time, and altogether I've now been the author or co-author of 12 books about the future.
Yes, incredible.
Because a lot of the future is tied up with what can we expect from technology. A lot of the future is tied up with, can we control technology, or will technology end up doing bad things to us, like damaging the environment or putting more weapons into the hands of military leaders who might, in some cases, misuse them, and so on. So a lot of the questions about the desirable future, they're not independent. And so in these 12 books and in many other articles online, I've been trying to build a big picture of how do things fit together. And there's, by the way, of course, as you know, philosophical implications too, because most people have thought we are humans because we die. It's been part of what we've learned from our grandmother's knee. Hey, you, don't get too attached to life. You're going to get old and die sometime. This is one of the so-called noble truths of many ancient philosophies.
Yes.
And so there are many philosophical questions. There are questions about economics. If there are more people living much longer, can we cope with them on the planet? So you can't just pick and choose. You need to have quite a wide range of ideas. So as far as possible, I'm trying to cover all of that in my book. People who heard you reading that opening introduction earlier, as you started the podcast, some of them might have raised their eyebrows quite high and say, what about this? What about that? I try in that book to answer most of these what about questions as well. So I encourage people who have got questions, be a little bit open-minded, dive in, and hopefully you'll see what I learned over that same period of time.
I think given the fact that we have social media now, and we have an influx of information in social media with such varied opinions from varied experts, I think people have become more open-minded, and they have come to terms that our societal conditioning isn't what life is truly about. The philosophy on transhumanism, that's also something not many people even heard about or even know about. And I would like for you to explain this philosophy, and why do you back this up?
So transhumanism means that we can transcend our human limitations by wise and profound selective use of technology. So transhuman, transcend human limitations. Now, some people say, well, our limitations are what makes us human. It's great that we stumble from time to time, that we are sometimes stupid. It's wonderful. And I say, some of that's fine, but a lot of what we do as humans is terrible. We have got abuse of power written deep in our DNA. We have got deceit written deep in our DNA. Why did our brains grow so large? One reason our brains grew so large over prehistoric times is so we could collaborate better. But another is so we were more skilled in deceiving each other and more skilled at detecting deceptions and not letting on that we detected deceptions. One of the greatest human skills is gossip, wisely injecting little bits of gossip so that your rivals are deemed to be poor in some ways. So that's in our nature. We have in our nature some mistakes in thinking. If psychologists call them cognitive biases. If we see something that happens to us, we tend to imagine it's much more common than it actually is. There's about 100 of such cognitive biases. If you look on the page in Wikipedia, a common name for it is stupidity. We are sometimes, despite being clever, sometimes we are also stupid. And we are able to use our cleverness to rationalize our stupidity. We say we are rational species, but a better way is we are rationalizing. Anyway, and we also have defects in our biology. We have a biology that tends to make us go downhill. Our eyes don't see so well, our muscles get weaker, our immune system gets poorer, our brain gets defective. And we transhumanists, and I certainly count myself as a transhumanist, say this is something we can improve on. Indeed, this is something we must improve on, because if we keep the same kind of human character as we've got now and give people more powerful weapons, more powerful technologies, people will do increasingly bad things with it. People who are angry, people who are frustrated, people who are lost in their own warped ideologies or just driven by their own melancholy will do terrible things to neighbors. And we might destroy the whole planet unless we improve the human condition. So transhumanists talk about improving the physical condition, that we have super longevity. Also talk about improving our reasoning. Sometimes we call it super intelligence. And improving our psychology or our emotions. We call it super happiness. And talk about improving how we interact with each other so that we no longer abuse power, so that we're no longer egotistical and no longer divisive. And sometimes we call that super democracy. So that's a quick introduction to the philosophy of transhumanism, which comes about, I think, chapter 12 of my book of the Abolition of Aging. It's the philosophical underpinning that shows that this is part of a broader image of how technology can make humans better. But actually, we've been using technology since even before history. We used technology such as fire, which allowed us to digest food more quickly because it was cooked. We had technologies such as the sling. That's where you could carry a baby and then still have both hands free. That I think anthropologists reckon was an important step forwards. And we've had all kinds of other technologies such as artificial hips or artificial lenses or pacemakers. And transhumanists say we can do more. We will transform humanity more fundamentally, including the abolition of aging.
I mean, just that philosophy alone, and now people understanding it even more. I think a lot of people will call themselves transhumanists.
They should.
Because they really want, we're all desperate to, why is beauty so, that industry makes so much money, right? It's what, $1 trillion industry? And why are we always pushing, the beauty standards? It's because people want to stay youthful for so long. Your wife's Korean. You know how Korean beauty and the standards of beauty in Korea is also extreme, and how they really kind of take care of themselves, and the technology and everything they use to just stay youthful. And you above everybody else would know what that is like, right? Where do we currently stand today in science and technology when it comes to reverse aging or even halting it?
So the first thing I'll say is how many people are working on the field. And you mentioned that things are changing nowadays. People are more open-minded. In part, it's because of the work of a few courageous pioneers who didn't just say it was a nice ideal. They were actually doing real science on the reversing of aging. So if you go back to the 1980s, there were literally less than 10 people doing serious work, proud to call themselves that they were scientists against aging. People like Michael Rose or Michael West. Michael Rose was in the UK. He was doing experiments with fruit flies to try and figure out if he just picked the fruit flies that gave birth to eggs later in their lives, that these were the ones that he would allow to go to the next generation. And the ones who had eggs earlier, he didn't continue. So he did that for multiple generations, and he ended up extending the lives of these fruit flies threefold, fourfold. And they're still healthy, by the way. They're not decrepit. So that was one of the he didn't finish that in the 1980s, but he's been working on that since the 1980s. And other people could gradually see, oh, there really is interesting work you can do. There was another researcher, Cynthia Kenyon is the most famous one. They figured out that by just having a small change in one of the genes of a small worm, it's famous in biologists, it's called C. elegans worm. It's been studied very heavily. It doesn't have so many genes, doesn't have so many neurons, so it's quite easy to experiment. And if you radiate the animal when it's giving birth to new generations, you can end up changing genes. And with one change in gene, the animals live twice as long.
Wow.
Now, it's harder with humans because we're much more complicated, but there was some initial findings, and that encouraged every decade since then, roughly there's about 10 times as many people working. So in the 1990s, there was maybe up to 100 people working in it. In the 2000s, there were thousands of people. In the 2010s, tens of thousands of people. Now there's hundreds of thousands of people who are quite open to say, I'm doing this research. And when we come towards 2040, there's probably going to be 1 million people, if I've done that calculation correctly. And I think that's what is causing the acceleration. So we saw that we could improve the length of the lives of fruit flies and worms. People have also figured out lots of ways of improving the length of lives of mice. They've also found lots of animals that surprisingly live much longer than you'd expect. And this has led to people figuring out, well, why do they do it? Oh, we understand why they do it. And then you can copy some of that treatments. I maybe mentioned the naked mole rat. Now, the naked mole rat lives underground. It doesn't have fur, which is why it's called naked. It lives in colonies. Strangely, there's one breeding queen. So in some sense, it's got some of the attributes of the social insects. And you'd think a small little animal like that would typically live maybe 5, 6, 7 years. Well, they can live up to 40 years. And even more interestingly, they don't show signs of aging in the sense most animals age, meaning that as they're older, they're more likely to die. So when you're young, you don't die so often. By the time you get into middle age, you're more likely to die. By the time you get into old age, you're dying much more often. And almost every animal has that exponential increase in mortality.
Right.
But the naked mole rat doesn't. So even when they're in their 30s, they're not dying more often than when they were in their 10s. And people figure out that they also hardly ever get cancer. Now, scientists have found all kinds of nasty ways of giving rodents, of which the naked mole rat is an example, cancer. Normally, if you expose it to various environmental impacts. And they don't. So how on earth, why not? So people study them, and one thing they discovered is that there's something called hyaluronic acid,
Yes.
which many people who study about cosmetics know about.
Yes.
And there's different kinds of hyaluronic acid. And it turns out that the naked mole rat has a long chain, so-called, which means that they're actually longer than most normal acids. And they also have much more of it than other animals. So people wondered, is that one of the reasons why they don't age? So a clever researcher found the gene, that's the part of the DNA that was responsible for this. And the first thing she did is she had some naked mole rats genetically edited to remove that gene. So they don't have the same hyaluronic acid. And guess what? These animals do get cancer more often.
Wow.
The next experiment
That's
is you
insane.
take a mouse, and in the same way, you edit the mouse when it's just an egg or a zygote, and you can add that gene in. And what happens to that mouse? They get cancer much less often than other mice.
That's insane.
So now, this is not very good for humans because most of us want to have this in our middle age. And you can't go back and change all the genes in all of our body.
Yeah.
But you can figure out other ways to have the same impact. So that's just one kind of a bit of research. And we could talk 5 hours, literally, about all the interesting research. But the main point is more people are seeing it. More people are bold enough to say, I want to work on this. And as more people work on it, we're going to make faster progress, exponentially faster progress.
You know, there's always going to be people who are going to question what it's like to live longer.
Yes.
Because we've already been programmed a certain way, right? We're born and we've been given these set of programs. And we live life based on these set of programs. And outside of that set of programs, and because it's not what we are used to, it goes against all values and natures of normal thinking. However, because people are becoming more, liberal in the way that they're looking at things these days, there's still the question is if we do abolish aging, or if people are extending living past 130, 140, what actually happens to population?
So these are good questions, and absolutely we should look at them. Now, the Earth could cope with many more people than it's got today. There's a long history, in fact, of people being worried there's already too many people on the Earth. There was a Roman writer in about the year 200 who's claimed that there's already too many people on the Earth then, that they couldn't cope. Well, what's happened is we got better at agriculture. We got better at growing more food with the same amount of land. There was a guy in London, Thomas Malthus, who about the year 1800 said, we can't get away with it. There's always going to be cycles of famine because there's already too many people, and we shouldn't be surprised that every now and then you get lots of children dying through malnourishment.
Right.
So that was his forecast. And it turns out that the Industrial Revolution allowed much better agriculture as well. It improved agriculture. And then in last century, we had people who figured out how to do much better fertilizer, the so-called Haber-Bosch process. They could grow artificial fertilizer rather than what people did before. They collected dung from animals. There was a crisis in the early 20th century. They'd run out of bird dung. They used to have an actual industry. They would go to places in South America where there was hundreds of years of bird dung solidified. They would take that and use it to fertilize, and they'd run out of it, and they were panicking. And thankfully, the ability to create artificial fertilizer, turning the nitrogen in the air into ammonia, which is the core. And then later, there was the Green Revolution of people like Norman Borlaug, who did some genetic engineering to figure out how we can make wheat have more yield. And other predictions, a bit like Malthus, there was a guy called Paul Ehrlich, who in the 1970s said it's sure thing, we're going to have hundreds of millions of people in India are going to die because there's absolutely no way we can feed all these people.
Right.
And guess what? They managed to feed huge numbers by improving agriculture. So there's lots more improvements in agriculture that will come. The biggest improvement in agriculture, and this may be a bit controversial, is that we will no longer give over large bits of land to grow living animals who will then be killed and turned into meat. Instead, we can grow meat in a lab. We can grow meat in a bit like we grow whiskey. We distill it, or growing beer. So you can do this with much, much less land. Huge amounts of the land are currently given over to growing vegetables so we can feed to animals. So this is an improvement in so many ways. So I think the Earth could cope quite easily with 10 times as many people as we've got today. Maybe even 100 billion. And I write that in one of my other books. I give the argument. And eventually, we can move into space. But there's no hurry. There's plenty of space on the Earth first that we can cope with more people.
I mean, we already have people like Elon Musk and even Jeff Bezos who are like wanting to take us to a different dimension and different world.
Go to Mars. Maybe we wouldn't go to Mars. Maybe we'll just have taller skyscrapers to start off with. And then we'll have space stations. Space stations which somehow mimic gravity.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, so that can happen later this century, but there's no need to hurry because, as I've said, there's plenty of space on this planet. Now, there is a big problem, of course, which is climate change in the short term. And when people complain about overpopulation, often what's in the back of their mind is, well, we're not looking after the planet currently, and we are emitting more and more greenhouse gases. And if more people live longer, and if they live in the kind of American lifestyle, which technology might allow them to, they will be emitting even more greenhouse gases.
Right.
So that is a shorter term issue, and we need to hurry up the same kind of technology that will allow the abolition of aging, the same technology that will allow artificial meat, the same technology will allow all the green revolution to go faster. And so we will have really clean energy, not just electric cars, but we probably have nuclear fusion before long, which has a virtually unlimited amount of clean energy. If we don't do that, we can also put more satellites in space to catch more of the energy from the sun. We can have huge solar panels in space and then beam the energy down to the Earth. So that will solve global warming much more quickly. It's with technology.
There is, this deep-rooted fear, though, that, okay, maybe all of this stuff that you're saying is amazing and it's like, people are inspired. But on the flip side of that, there's still that fear that, humans are playing God when it comes to longevity research, specifically from a religious perspective,
Yeah.
right? And the religious beliefs that object that way of thinking.
Yeah.
How do you address that?
That's a good question. Religion has a spectrum of different views, and some people in religions have often fought against medical progress, and other people have been open-minded. So one example, right at the beginning of the book of Genesis, the first book in the Bible, in chapter 3, a woman is blamed for causing all the problems in the planet by eating fruit, according to the words of a serpent. And in the book of Genesis, God curses the woman and says, from now on, all kinds of bad things will happen. And by the way, when you have childbirth, you will cry out in deep pain. So people said, well, it's good that women cry out in pain because this is part of God's wish. Now people discovered ways to avoid mothers having such pain in childbirth. And they discovered things like chloroform, anesthetics. And there was a big battle. Should this be allowed or not? And some of the clergy said, it's a deep spiritual experience. The profound and terrible pain of childbirth forces you to contemplate your relationship with God as never before. And somebody who rejected to that was the Queen of England, Queen Victoria. She'd already had about 6 or 7 children without any anesthetic. And she'd heard that there was something that would allow the less pain. And at first, she was persuaded it was too dangerous, so she had one other child naturally. But for the last 2, I think, children, she had chloroform, and she said, blessed chloroform. She overruled the dictates of a few narrow-minded religious people who were insisting on doing it. And from then on, most people have said, of course God doesn't want people to suffer in such a way. Don't take it too literally. Other people have said, if a child is born crippled, it's karma, it's from their past lives. Don't interfere. Who are you to play God and try and cure this child?
Right.
Thankfully, medical doctors have come along. They have, I wouldn't say played God, because that trivializes it, but they have taken the power of life and death and tried to help people who were born with childhood diseases. And so thankfully, we no longer have children with polio. People used to say, well, if somebody's got polio, they must have done something bad in their past life, or maybe their parents sinned. It's God's will. Who are we mere mortals to question it? But thankfully, we managed to introduce vaccinations that prevent most people having polio. There are people in my wife's family in South Korea who had polio as a childhood and still struggle to this day with and I will not hear from any narrow-minded religionists to say this is God's will. I will not hear it either that we are playing God. That trivializes it. We are being very serious in improving. So when somebody says it's God's will that we get old and die, I will say, I want to give people the choice. I want to give people, now if they want to get old and die, that is also their choice, but they should not inflict that on others.
There has been so many extremists, I would say, when it comes to trying to biohack your health. And although this term biohacking has come into trend now, people have been biohacking for centuries.
Yes.
Right? In very different cultures, they've been biohacking. And we have the likes of Brian Johnson, who is like exchanging, blood draws with his son and with his dad. And then we even have the likes of who've gone even more extreme, Joshua Zayner, who was a former NASA scientist, who injected himself with the CRISPR and DNA to enhance muscle growth. And when you think about it, though, it's a bit extreme what people would go through just to be able to get some kind of end result that they want to get, right? And they're using their own life to be able to do this. Where do you think, though, that people should draw the line between finding incredible innovation and risk?
So every medical advance has some risks involved. When I mentioned vaccines earlier, there are risks to some side effects of vaccines. And some of the early polio vaccinations mistakenly used the wrong kinds of vaccines and caused some grief. Now, but overall, we say, thankfully, many fewer people have polio and the vaccines got better and better. Now let's talk about improving your muscle mass. This is now seems to be safer, and there are labs around the world. There's one in Honduras, in an island called Prospera. There's a company there called Mini Circles, and they have developed quite an effective way to allow people to have a genetic modification that will give them more follistatin, which handles the degradation of muscles. Because as we get older, more of our muscles turn to fat. Even if we do all kinds of good things in the gym, it's still a growing trend. So the older you are, the more you're likely to benefit from having this follistatin. And at first people said, well, can it be trusted? And the first few people who did it, maybe they're a bit crazy, but sometimes that's how scientific research is done. And now it seems there's more of a track record, and we don't understand all of the science involved, but we can see it basically. If people take this follistatin, there are other improvements in their health unexpectedly as well. There are other ways of measuring your age, so-called biomarkers of aging. They're somehow a bit controversial, and not everybody agrees with each of them. But there are many indications that when people have this follistatin treatment with the CRISPR modification of their genes, they get younger, not just that their muscles are healthier, but their other aspects of their body are healthier too. It's not to say we should jump into everything that's done. I'm a sort of a late adopter, or maybe early majority adopter, but I'm not on the cutting edge with some of that stuff. But others are more naturally bold, and they do things. And here's another example. It's from a slightly different field. The question as to what causes stomach ulcers. And people used to say stomach ulcers are just caused by stress. It's caused by bad thinking. It's caused by wrong lifestyle. There was an Australian doctor who was fairly convinced that at least some stomach ulcers were caused by an infection. And this idea had been rejected through earlier tests, but he was fairly sure. So he drank a whole concoction of infection, and he did develop the stomach ulcers. And then he treated himself with something to overcome that infection, and he got better. So I'm not saying everybody should go about drinking concoctions full of infections, but he has been a hero in many people in demonstrating on himself that there is at least some cases of ulcers that are caused by infection rather than by what was previously thought to be the main cause. So we should be grateful for people willing to take these experiments, but then of course we need to assess what are the risks. Sometimes early vaccines need to be modified to make them safer. Sometimes we get better and better treatments.
But do-it-yourself treatments though, I mean, in one part, what they're doing is incredible, but also on another part of that, people think that they can do it themselves, where in many cases, especially like CRISPR-edited DNA, it's not something that you can just go and inject yourself with. You need to have be around people that know what they're doing. You need to be under supervision. However, there are people who are kind of just doing it on their own because they see that these experts are doing it, right? So there is a line that should be drawn though, because everything needs to be supervised by people who actually know what they're doing. There are a lot of people as well in the dermatology space where they do things to their skin at home where they feel like that's the best way to do it. Like I would say micro needling is one of them. And you have these pens that you can kind of do them at home, but then you'll hear horror stories from these women who have done these micro needlings at home because they didn't understand the proper protocol to do that and actually caused more harm than their initial, expectation from that, which is, I want to look youthful, right? So sure, there are people who are doing it for the, the betterment of the world and what we're trying to achieve, but we still need to have precautions and be understanding the definite risks before getting involved into anything. Now, all of these things sound amazing and incredible, and all the stuff that Brian Johnson's doing and everyone that has money are getting into all of these things, they're expensive. It's not cheap. And people that are listening to this are from all walks of life, and not everyone has, indisposable amount of income. Is this trend or the way that we're moving towards the future only for the rich, or can everyone afford it eventually?
So the goal is that these treatments will be completely affordable for everybody around the world. And the pattern to look at is that many other fields of technology or products do get a lot cheaper over time. Initially, they're very expensive. Initially, they're not even very good often. The first mobile phones were very expensive and not very great. The first smartphones, they had many flaws, but people who had enough money were able to buy them and put up with the flaws. And over time, they get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. Why do they get cheaper? It's because of more innovation. There are economies of scale. When you're doing things millions of times, you can do it more cheaply than if you're only doing one or two. And so if you walk around supermarkets, I'm often amazed after I've done my shopping in a supermarket at how low the cost is. All these things in my basket and it's still only £20. So of course some people will say some costs are too high, but we have found ways as a society to reduce lots of costs remarkably, especially when the free market works well. There's a healthy competition. Sometimes, of course, the free market doesn't work well. You get blockages, you get people hoarding intellectual property, you get people saying, well, I'm not going to allow you access to this drug because I want to make a fortune out of it. Eventually it might come out of patent, but there are still cases, especially in America, which is the worst case, when healthcare bankrupts people, whereas in other parts of the world it's still expensive, but it's often cheaper. So what we need to do is to ensure that the positive trajectory of downward curves and costs happens without sacrificing quality. And how is that going to happen? In part by making sure that the free market works properly, rather than just locking things up in a monopoly situation. And secondly, by applying democratic pressure. Democratic pressure, more people are going to say, let's make sure that this is at a lower cost. And governments will step in and say, you know what, it makes sense to do this. Sometimes governments will invest in doing things because it's there's an economic case for the whole country. Now, if we don't have these treatments, what happens? We still end up spending a lot of money on people who are sick,
right?
And it's very expensive. In fact, most of the cost of somebody to their health service is in the last few years of their lives, when they have multiple comorbidities and they're in and out of hospitals, maybe over a few years. And you can be in and out of hospitals more time in the last few years using more expensive treatments than all of the previous years together.
But hospitals want us to stay sick, though.
Well, some hospitals do.
It's a commercial gain for them.
Well, that's when it doesn't work properly.
Right.
Then other parts of the world, hospitals are more incentivized to get people healthy. And we've got to fix this bad incentive. One of the big problems in life is that people are incentivized to do the wrong things.
Exactly.
Free market can be wonderful, but it also needs monitoring so that it doesn't incentivize the bad behavior. So you're quite right there. But governments should realize, and other parts of society, like insurance companies, insurance companies are incentivized to keep people healthy as well. Because if they're not healthy, they end up having to pay more on the treatments.
Right.
So many insurance companies are already trying to incentivize people. We'll give you a discount if you can prove you're going to the gym. We'll give you a discount if you're doing that, and such other things. So governments, if they're wise, will pursue what's called the longevity dividend, which means if you invest money to keep people healthy for longer, you don't have to spend anything like so much money in the next few years of their lives because they remain young and fit effectively. Of course, the number of candles on your cake continues to grow because you get chronologically older, but you will still have the health and vitality of maybe a 30-year-old when you're in your 60s, 70s, or 80s.
I definitely feel like I'm in my 40s now, and I'm turning 45 this year, and I definitely feel like I'm like in my 20s. I feel great. I feel better than I did in my 20s. I'm also just, because I don't think, feeling good is just about, your health. It's also about your confidence. It's also about how you look at life and your perspective, and how, your mental health is coping with the changes so rapidly. And I was a mess in my 20s, and that's when they make this quote.
Hard to believe.
And when they make this quote, and they said this quote, a famous one, that life really begins at 40. It's true though, and you don't understand.
Life really begins when you're 60.
When you're right, yeah, I can for sure, and I'm not there yet, so I can't say that. But for sure, with age, and it's only that when you hit those milestones would you actually realize that it's true what they say. And I've become an even bigger believer now in all of the wisdom that the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s centenarians talk about all the time, because now I've hit that age and all the symptoms and things that I didn't believe in, I do feel them in certain parts of life, because of course I worry about menopause and, I didn't know so much about it until I hit my 40s, and I care about it so much more now. Not from a standpoint because I want to have children, and because I guess a lot of women, worry about that, their biological clock, and it's ticking. You need to have kids. Again, that's another societal conditioning, by the way. And I look at it more from a standpoint of, what happens to your body after you hit menopause. Also, your risk to disease after you hit menopause, because it's a known fact that heart disease is more likely, it's higher in men than in women. But once women hit the age of menopause as well, that they have the same risks for heart disease. So, those kind of things are worrying for a lot of women who are approaching that age. So my next question to you is, if we're reaching the age of 150 and over, with people who are Brian Johnson and the movement of Don't Die, what happens to just society as a whole, like our relationships, our career paths, our purpose? Like, how does that dramatically change though?
Well, that's a good question. And I may say we don't have all the answers, but I would say that's a much better problem to have than the current problem, which is people getting old, feeble, weak, demented.
But are we going to be as driven if we know we're going to have so much time?
Well, I don't think you need to have a time curtain in order to make you driven. And one example is if you look at young children. Young children are sometimes so full of life. And the reason they're running around is they're not thinking, hey, in 80 years' time, I'm going to be dead. I better hurry up and run around. You can find meaning of life in life. So when people say the meaning of life is to learn how to die, I will say the meaning of life is to learn how to live.
Yeah.
And you can certainly have short-term milestones as well. Even if you want to live long, you still maybe only have 90 minutes to play a match of football. And you can't just say, well, I'm going to score in the 300th minute, because guess what? The game's finished before 300 minutes come along. So we will construct things to have social pressures and keep people active. There are already some constraints in society to ensure there's turnaround. One of the good things to the American political system is that they only allow a president to hold 2 terms. So even though maybe there are some quite young ex-presidents in America who would probably do a good job, they're not allowed to run again. And this is part of ensuring a turnover. So we'll probably have some other things built into society to ensure there's turnover. But these are much better problems to have than the current problem of people costing a huge amount of money as they get old and dying, and losing relationships and not being able to see their children or your grandchildren grow up and flourish.
I think there's definitely beauty into knowing that there's a limit in life, in the sense that we're more driven and want to accomplish so much. But on the other side of that is that we also want to live to a point where we've accomplished everything. So what's the right age really? Like, how do we know? Where do we want to be immortal? Do we want to be just mortal to a certain age? Like, what's the end goal for a lot of these, people in the longevity space who really want to extend life? And the don't die concept is like, we're not immortal, but when we reach that stage of immortality, would we want it? There's that debate, and that, just that thought, if it's something like we're always, as humans, we're always craving and searching for the next best thing. And it's the saying that the grass is not always greener. It's the same in relationships. People no longer want to stay in long partnerships because they feel that they can get better if this one's no longer working. In the day and age that we're in today, with all the dating apps and the lack of connection, we have so much options in terms of what we can get. So I don't know if for myself I want to be immortal, but I just know that I want to be able to live long enough to be able to accomplish everything that I wanted to accomplish and move on to the next life having felt that I've done everything. But most of the time, people in their deathbeds are always like, I haven't accomplished everything. And that's where the whole fact of I want to live longer comes from, right? And do you think that you have accomplished enough at this stage of life? And, how many more years do you want to live to accomplish everything that you want to still accomplish?
So the main point is that people shouldn't be forced at any age against their will to grow old and die. People should have the ability to say, there's more that I want to accomplish. There's more things I want to see.
Yeah.
And eventually people may say they've done enough. If they really are satisfied, they may say, right, I'm going to end my life now. Although even in such a case, they might prefer to go into a deep sleep in case something really interesting comes along.
Yeah, I like that. I like that option.
Yes. So biostasis is sometimes called, or cryonic suspension.
So where are we now in that technology?
That we can suspend people and keep them in quite a good condition.
Wow.
So long as we get to them soon after they legally die.
Wow.
If they're left alone for a while, the brain decays quite quickly. So if you can get to people quite quickly, we can suspend them, and you can actually then study their brains, and there are good signs that the brain structure's still in place. And we can't reanimate them yet, but that's something that will come with future science. So the question is, are we suspending people as well as we'd like? And it varies, because it depends how they die, especially if you die from dementia. It's really awkward.
Yeah.
Some people say,
right.
Cancer's a good way to die if you want to be chronically preserved, because your
Really?
brain typically will be, not cancer of the brain, but if you die from some other reason.
Cancers,
So then there's a good chance your brain's still in good condition,
right,
even though your body can no longer support it. So that's there. But more generally on what will people want to do, I think there's a lot we haven't even considered that we might want to do. So what do I want to do? It's a huge amount of music I want to explore. I look at some of the music I love so much, and I'm aware that other people say, well, if you like this, you're going to like this as well. And I haven't got the time to explore it.
Yeah.
So let's pick Mike Oldfield, who wrote Tubular Bells, which is a really lovely piece of music from my adolescence. And people have said, well, he's written about 10 other pieces of music that are in their own ways just as good as Tubular Bells. It takes a bit of time to get used to them.
Totally.
And I don't have the time to learn about them.
Yeah.
So there's music, there's literature, there's a huge amount of books I'd love to read, films to explore,
Exactly.
Games to play, virtual worlds to explore,
Right.
and there's humans to get to know. Spending time. When you mentioned that on dating apps you can see all kinds of fascinating people, well, what's wrong with spending 10 years with one and then 10 years with another and then 10 years with another?
Oh my God!
I'm not saying that's necessarily the right thing to do. But, we might, if it turns out that the relationship runs its course, and I'm not saying all relationships need to run their course,
true.
but some people have that, and some relationships, after a while, you can say, well, it's been wonderful, but now we changed. So why not have 5-year relationships going on for the next 500 years? I'm not going to rule that out,
Yeah.
So, and then eventually, as I've said, somebody may say, they've done enough, thank you. But in my case, I want to see my grandchildren grow up.
Exactly.
And I'd like to be interested in what kind of people they're meeting, and maybe they will have children of their own, so I'd like to see my great-grandchildren growing up. Yeah. And they're fascinating, my 2 grandsons. And whenever I meet them, I think, I'm not in any hurry for this relationship to stop,
Right. I love all of that. I think just from that alone, you can just already tell what kind of person you are, And you're right. Everyone has a choice at the end of the day. It's not like you're forcing people to live forever or to live to as long as everyone should live, right? There isn't like a mark that everyone should live till 180 and that's it. And people should extend their life that way. But then again, I feel this topic can go on because it's like so many different varied opinions of how people should or can't. But the fact that we have the option to do so is something really promising, because we didn't have that option before. and it's always like you're dying of a chronic disease. And now we're more like, we feel more like we love life even more now because we know that there are options that can help us live even longer. Do you actually know anyone personally who have had a family member or anyone did the cryo thing?
Yes.
Wow.
I know people whose
That's amazing.
husbands or wives are being cryopreserved.
Wow. That's cool.
And
Okay.
they look forward to them being reanimated in the future. And in the meantime, some of them have got new relationships.
Wow.
And what are they going to do when their former spouse is reanimated? Well, that's a nice problem to have.
It is
They'd
totally.
rather have that choice than not have
Yeah.
any choice at all.
But did they die when they got cryopreserved, or how does it?
Oh no, you have to
How does
die
it work?
first. You have to be declared legally dead.
So you have to die first
Yes.
from just natural causes or even cancer?
Yes, well, cancer is a natural cause, if you
Yeah,
like.
of course, a
Yes.
natural cause.
So,
But not always,
you need to be
sometimes
declared
it's
legally dead. And by
cancer.
the way, death is a slippery concept.
Yeah.
Once upon a time, if your heart stopped beating, you were dead.
Yes.
There was no way to bring you
Yes.
back. Now we found ways you can apply pressure or electric shocks, and you can bring them back.
Yeah.
Now, most people who are declared legally dead, they could be brought back, but they say do not resuscitate. Some people in hospitals
Yeah,
have
they
got this
can't
mark. They say,
resuscitate, right.
my life is full of pain now, and so if I do die, my heart stops beating, don't resuscitate me.
Yeah.
Yes. So cryonics people, they often have the same. They know their lives could be prolonged if when their heart stops beating, they could be brought back. But instead, they're given various chemicals so they won't become conscious again.
Right.
And then their heart is restarted after they've been declared legally dead so that the blood flows and then the blood is replaced by a cryoprotectant.
That's crazy.
It's a long, fascinating story. There's interesting
Oh my
science
God.
in this.
That's mad.
And people have a kind of mixed reactions. Part of them is curious, another part of them says yuck. But a lot of the medical procedures, initially people said yuck. Blood transfusion, getting blood from somebody else, oh yuck, I don't want that. Or some of the herbs that you take, or potions you rub on your skin, or sticking needles in your skin. Yuck. Well, maybe it's not too bad. So the people's attitude will change when they can see this is a possible continuation of your life. You've not finished everything you want to finish. Often cancer creeps up in you and then kills you much more quickly than you expect. Sadly, that's the case in some people I've known.
Right.
And they arrange, therefore, for an on-standby team to be nearby, so that as soon as the doctor declares them legally dead, they can move in and lower the temperature of the brain quickly in a way that doesn't include ice crystals, which can be damaging. So it's quite a complicated process.
Yeah, sounds
Ice
like it.
will damage it, but we're not actually freezing them. We are vitrifying them, which is more like turning it into a different state, glass state, in which there isn't the damage that would rupture the brain and prevent it from ever coming back to life in the future.
What is the most controversial belief that you hold when it comes to longevity that most people in the field disagree with?
Well, I have a belief that lots of people in my field disagree with, that we can actually get there by 2040. We can do this. Because there are many people who've been in the field for a while and they feel progress isn't going fast enough. And so they extrapolate, well, at this rate of progress, it's going to take 100 years. Right. And so they're looking around. But what I've described is an exponential increase in progress. I mentioned maybe 10 times as many people every decade are working on this. Another thing that's going to speed up our progress, and this is very important, is improvements in AI.
Yes.
So we no longer just have human intelligence, we have artificial intelligence looking at all the data. And if you give artificial intelligence lots of data, it may spot patterns which were not obvious to us in advance. So one of the leading CEOs of one of the leading AI companies recently, Anthropic, his name is Dario Amodei, and he has issued a few months ago quite a long essay called Machines of Loving Grace, in which the AIs, he claims, will help us to accomplish in just 5 or 10 years the biological research that without AIs would have taken 50 to 100 years. And he explains the ways in which AIs will help us do that. And we have some evidence already. If you look at the Nobel Prize in Chemistry given out last year, 2024, it was given to 3 people, including Demis Hassabis, the CEO of another AI company, DeepMind. Why? Because they had an AI breakthrough that could predict in advance how a protein would fold up in 3 dimensions. A protein's a long molecule made up of a large number of amino acids. Amino acids are small molecules. They link together, and it doesn't stay as a long chain. It folds up due to electric forces into a complicated 3-dimensional molecule. And if you want to predict how it interacts, you need to know that in advance. And for 60 years, people have tried to solve the problem in old-fashioned ways. And what the Nobel Prize was given out for is an AI that could reliably predict, just from the specification of the amino acids, how the protein would fold up. And that has rightly been heralded. So there are people who say we will get there faster. I think what's really going to make the difference is a few breakthrough experiments that will extend the lives of probably mice much longer than was previously thought possible. Mice, the type used in labs, typically live 2.5 years. And the experiments that my foundation, the foundation which I helped to run, the Longevity Escape Velocity Foundation, we're doing experiments in which we take middle-aged mice, which is sort of equivalent to a 50-year-old human. If a human lives 80 years, a 50-year-old is sort of equivalent to an 18-month-old mouse, with no special treatments, no special genetic programming, no CRISPR's been done to it, nothing's happened to it when it was a zygote. It's a normal mouse, and then we apply a number of treatments. Now, typically they would live 1 more year on average, and we know there's a number of treatments that typically will add 2 or 3 months to their average life, and we're doing a combination of these treatments. And the goal is that it will not just live a few months longer, it will live another year longer. So it will double its remaining life expectancy. And in human terms, that would mean a 50-year-old who had treatments wouldn't expect to live to 80, they could expect to live to 110.
That's madness. That's
now,
so
if we have
cool.
these experiments, it's going to make people change their minds about how close we are to that income. But what's holding us up is what's holding much of the rest of the field up. All these experiments cost money.
Right.
To do it in a statistically relevant way, you need to have at least 1,000 mice in such experiments.
Right.
To get an 18-month-old mouse, you've got to pay quite a lot of money.
Right.
To have all the treatments, you need quite a lot of money. It's not yet at the scale when the treatments are low cost. So such an experiment costs something like $4 or $5 million to do. So we've done one experiment, and we're now raising funds for second phase. So if anybody listening to this is interested, and if you happen to know a rich friend who might be willing to support such projects, the reason for supporting such a project is they don't last forever. You don't have to wait 30 years to see whether the experiment has actually worked. In just a couple of years, there is the possibility that a combination of maybe 8 different treatments will double the life of a mouse, which is then going to lead more people to say, you know what, I'm going to allow myself to believe that this is a good thing. Most people don't want to get their hopes up. But when people say it could happen much more quickly, there can be effectively like a war.
Right.
A war mentality.
Right.
So that's my belief, that maybe not everybody in the field shares. And I think we already understand enough about aging. We just need to figure out which of the treatments work well, particularly which of them work well in combination with each other rather than interfering with each other.
My next question to you was, if there was one longevity research that you could fast track today, which one would it be? I'm assuming that's the one.
That's the one.
That's definitely the one.
Experiments with these mice. Yeah. We call this project RMR, Robust Mouse Rejuvenation.
Right.
We give middle-aged mice rejuvenation treatments, and we want to have a robust effect, which means that it's statistically solid and has a good impact.
My last and final question to you, because, I mean, you've shared so many insights of where the world is going, and I'm very, very excited about the future of longevity and aging, and I'm happy that I will get a chance to, meet my son's grandson and maybe their children, my grandchildren's grandchildren. So for me, I want to be able to experience life in a sense that I have accomplished everything, but also see my family accomplish everything. So my last question to you is, what does Be That Life mean to you?
Be That Life means that we no longer are constrained by the terrible aspects of human nature that we've inherited from evolution. that we can spring free from these constraints. We can transcend our biology, transcend our societal defects, transcend the defects in the philosophy that we've inherited, and allow us to be liberated, to explore much more than we could ever imagine. I'm fairly sure that in 20 years' time, I'll be doing things that I can't even imagine now. I'll probably be in some virtual worlds, 5-dimensional chess people talk about. Well, it might be 5-dimensional SimCity, or in which there will be huge emotional drama, which will be causing me stress, but a stress that isn't killing me. It's going to be fascinating. And I'd love for you to be able to join me there, and lots of other people that I meet along the way to join me there too.
Oh my God, it definitely sounds like a world I want to be in. Thank you so much, David. You've been incredible.
It's been my pleasure. Your questions were absolutely fascinating.